The UK government's support for Israel is almost unwavering, even in the face of a genocide in Gaza, but it has announced one package of measures aimed at punishing Israelis who continue to occupy Palestinian land in the West Bank. That's illegal settlers, of course. And one of them is now pretty famous or infamous, thanks to Louis Theroux and his recent BBC documentary. This is the godmother of Israeli settlerism, Daniella Weiss.
Jewish settlements in Gaza is a very difficult step that demands a lot of work. You have to influence the leftists, the government, the nations of the world, using the magic system, Zionism. You redeem the land, you establish communities, you bring Jewish families, you live Jewish life, and this will bring light instead of darkness. And this is how the state of Israel was established. And this is what we want to do in Gaza.
This process of making the whole of the West Bank and Gaza Jewish, do you feel like it's moving more quickly?
As far as Judea and Samaria is concerned, so we want to move from 1 million to 2 million. So this is the next step. This is my vision. It's so complicated.
Now, that plan of Weiss has got slightly more complicated. I mean, I don't think it's really going to deter her, but the UK has now imposed sanctions on her and two other settler leaders, her organisation, Nakala, and on two illegal outposts in the West Bank. The move means that any UK assets Weiss has will be frozen. She'll be restricted from using UK financial institutions. She'll be subject to a travel ban. It's not a lot. It's pretty late, especially given Weiss has been spreading her racist ideas for decades. This is from a Haaretz interview in 2022.
People say to me, why don't you explain to the Jews in the United States what is exactly behind your thinking? I explain. But I'm laughing because the right word for it, you have to brainwash all the time. You have to say, to explain it, to live it, to cope with it. My husband says to me, why do you speak to your children all the time about Zionism, pioneers in Judea and Samaria, settling? And all my family are settlers here. Because this is the only way to continue Zionism.
I mean, if Zionism is a very expansionary project, that is the only way to continue it. And obviously, what she's indoctrinating her children to believe is that you should expel Palestinians because of their ethnicity and steal their homes, essentially. Weiss is, of course, nothing if not consistent. Here she is back in 1987.
I don't see how any person, whether Arab or of any other nationality or any other origin, finding his future here unless he fully 100% identifies with the Zionist idea. And the Zionist idea is a state for the Jewish nation. This is identifying with our tradition, with our faith, with our will to build a state for the Jews, period. And what we exactly want is a state only for the Jews. Sometimes people are afraid to say it because it sounds racism, it sounds discriminatory. Yes, if they want, they are more than welcome to identify with the Zionist idea. But if they don't want, as they express it clearly that they don't want, I don't see any reason why they should stay here. Not because we tell them don't stay here, but because they realize that it's not a place for them.
Of course, I mean, again, this is another one of those UK policies where you sort of, we're going to put some sanctions on the lady that appeared in the Louis Theroux documentary, but not on Netanyahu, right? Who has been enabling this for decades, right? If you want a guy who is responsible for the expulsion of Palestinians from their home, yeah, Daniella Weiss is like a, she's a sort of caricature of evil. I mean, but Netanyahu is also a caricature of evil. Helena, it seems to me that this is, I suppose, the UK government going for, well, I don't want to say an easy target because, I mean, it's absolutely right to to put sanctions on this woman, right? I don't think we should feel sorry for, they've gone for an easy target. But it's missing the point, isn't it? Sanctioning this lady and still maintaining full diplomatic relations with Israel and essentially supporting Netanyahu.
Or indeed all of the support that we have given to Israel whilst they were building illegal settlements, obviously legal under international law, the outposts were legal under Israeli law, but when Likud are in power, they let them happen. Anyway, we've been happily having diplomatic relationships with Israel whilst they engage in settler colonialism in Palestine for decades and decades and decades, right? This is obviously a fly in the ointment. As you say, good, I'm glad that we're sanctioning people like Daniella Weiss, but it does feel like we're getting government by Netflix special at this point, in the same way that we only do stuff about the post office scandal when Alan Bates has a documentary about him or a dramatization on ITV, or we only talk about the issues facing young men and boys in this country when you have adolescents on Netflix. Oh, what, Louis Theroux did a documentary about the Israeli settlers? Well, okay, well, if we sanction that one specifically that everyone saw on the telly, then suddenly people will just forget about the fact that we've been selling the weapons for the government that's been committing the genocide. We've been giving diplomatic cover for the country that's been engaging in settler colonialism and the demolishing of homes, the murdering of journalists, the stealing of land, right? At least when you've got, people like Alan Duncan, who even when the Tories were in government, he was somebody in DFID who was explicitly calling out the fact that these were explicitly land grabs, right? Got briefed against him huge amounts by CFI. And the fact that we've not had any discussion, and in fact, when we tried to have discussion, of course, from 2015 to 2019 about the reality of the decades-long relationship between the UK and Israel, where at no point did we ever think, maybe the enabling that we have or something that delegitimizes our own government's diplomatic position with states globally on a kind of a utilitarian level. If we would just want what's good for our country, for example, having us related diplomatically to what's happening in Israel is terrible, even if we find it morally objectionable as well, which of course we should. This is something that is being used to distract people, right? It's not just in terms of the diplomatic cover. We don't do any sanctions on other groups that are operating in the illegal settlements in the West Bank, do we? For example, in Rosebank oil field, there is one of the companies that was given the license to drill there is a subsidiary of an Israeli oil company, which is explicitly and openly the financing of the energy infrastructure in the occupied the settlements in the occupied West Bank, right? Something that is out there enabling violations of international. We're like, help yourself to our natural resources, right? So when it comes to government by showmanship, what's going to look good for the cameras, what's going to poll well, what's going to be symbolic? Sure, sanctioning Daniella Weiss, that's going to play very well with floating voters who've seen the Louis Theroux documentary. But in terms of our material relationship with Israel, this is decades long, has left a trail of Palestinian blood and an absolute deluge of stolen land and broken promises and violations of international law, which a couple of puny sanctions will do nothing to remedy.
Yeah, I know they did it on yesterday's show, so we're not going to sort of pour over it again, but sort of David Lammy's telling Zara Sultana, you're just asking questions for a Twitter clip from the same person whose policies towards Israel sort of consist of sounding angry, putting sanctions on the lady from the documentary, but then continuing to sell arms to the actual Israeli government, who are actually supporting the crazy lady from the documentary and who are actually committing a genocide in Gaza. So sort of like for this Labour government who only do virtue signalling to then call someone who's actually been consistent on this a virtue signaller. Of course, Zara Sultana can't do much more than sort of do a speech in Parliament and then release it as a Twitter video. She's not in government. David Lammy is. Right, so as a backbencher, it kind of is Zara Sultana's job to virtue signal. But David Lammy, your job is to do something. So why are you just virtue signaling? Seems, Labour on this. It's morally despicable. It's also just another example of them being completely pathetic, which is to say, oh, we'd love to do something, but we can't. Why not? Obviously, there's no reason why the UK can't stop sending arms to Israel, can't put sanctions on Israel. Right? Why not? I think that would increase their popularity, by the way. It would at least make Keir Starmer seem like he stands for something. So, I can't do it because Donald Trump doesn't want us to do it. All the leaders in the world who stood up against Donald Trump have actually, done pretty well from it. Look at Mark Carney in Canada. Look at Albanese in Australia. So the idea that sort of like, oh, it would be too difficult to do this, so we're just going to sort of put some sanctions on the crazy lady from the documentary. Helena, I know you want to come back on this.
But it's interesting you say, obviously, that they feel like that they can't have been any more vociferous in their condemnation of Israel up to now, despite the fact, as you rightly point out, when you look at the polling nationally, when you look at what the polls look like, people really do dislike Israel and support Palestine in terms of what's happening in this conflict. They support overwhelmingly sanctions on Israel and arms embargo. These have been, and the arrest of Netanyahu in terms of the ICC arrest warrant, right? They've supported all of these things. The government has been very, very slow to act. There was a piece in The Independent that said, oh, well, the only reason why the Keir Starmer and David Lammy have been so reticent to show a little bit more kind of vociferousness in calling out Israel, and that we've got to the point where they're facilitating genocide and doing all of this too little too late, is because of Jeremy Corbyn still living rent-free in the heads of UK journalists. But of course, this shows you, again, what 2015 to 2019 was all about, and the demonization of the position that he held with regards to what was happening between Israel and Palestine. It was to get to a point to manufacture the consent to the point where we get to the place where politicians feel too scared to stop facilitating genocide because they might get criticized in the way Jeremy Corbyn got criticized from 2015 to 2019. Just openly, essentially, giving the game away by making this comparison. Well, Keir Starmer and David Lammy, they would do things, but they don't want to be compared to Jeremy Corbyn. I'm just like, well, that was what the consent was being manufactured for. So there was no possibility of UK politicians feeling safe to actually take a position that was anti-Israel, lest they be condemned by the press.